Google just dropped Gemma 4, and the pitch is not subtle. Open models are no longer supposed to feel second class. That is the whole vibe of this release. Not, here's a nice little open model for tinkering. More like, here is a family of open models for reasoning, multimodal work, agents, local code generation, and on-device deployment. That is a much bigger claim, and honestly, it's a much more interesting one. Because the most important fight in AI right now is not just which model is smartest, it's who gets to run powerful AI on hardware they control. Who gets privacy? Who gets offline capability? Who gets sovereignty? Who gets to build something serious without renting their brain from someone else's API forever? That is why Gemma 4 matters. If Google is right, this is a real shift. Open models become small enough to run locally, smart enough for real agentic work, and cheap enough to matter outside hyperscaler fantasy land. If Google is overselling it, then Gemma 4 is still a very polished launch page for a category that remains mostly useful in carefully chosen demos and benchmark screenshots. That's the reality filter, because byte for byte is a great marketing phrase. It also invites one very annoying question. Cool, but does that translate into real wins for normal developers once latency, hardware limits, tool reliability, and workflow pain show up? That's the episode. Not Gemma 4, good or bad, too shallow. The better question is this the moment open, local, self-hosted AI starts feeling operationally serious or just more respectable? Chapter 1. Google's Open Model Power Play. Let's define what Gemma 4 actually is, because that's where the signal starts. Gemma is Google DeepMind's open weight model family. And with Gemma 4, Google is clearly trying to move the conversation away from open model as backup chatbot and toward open model as infrastructure. That is a huge jump. The official family covers 4 sizes: E2B, E4B, a 26B A4B mixture of experts model, and a 31B dense model. That spread matters because it means Google is not aiming at one device class. They're aiming from phones and edge devices all the way up to laptops, workstations, and servers. That is a much bolder story than, we made a decent open model. And the feature set is doing a lot of the heavy lifting here. Google says Gemma 4 is built for advanced reasoning and agentic workflows. The docs say it supports native function calling, structured tool use, native system role support, multimodal input, and long context. The smaller models get text, image, and audio. The larger ones go harder on reasoning and context. In plain English, Google is trying to make open models feel less like toys and more like local infrastructure. That is the real pitch. Not talk to this model, build on top of it, run it where you want, fine-tune it, deploy it under your own rules, use it for coding, documents, vision, agents, and private workflows without automatically sending everything into somebody else's cloud. And this is where the release gets politically interesting without needing to become political, because control matters. Open weights plus a commercially permissive license means the question is no longer, can I access the model? It becomes, can I actually do serious work with it? That is a much harder test. And it's also why Google keeps pushing phrases like on your own hardware and secure boundaries. They know the real hook is not model fandom, it's ownership. Chapter 2. Why Gemma 4 actually matters. Now let's talk about why this matters beyond launch day hype. The AI market has had a weird split for a while. On one side, you have giant closed models that are undeniably powerful. On the other, you have open models that often feel like honorable underdogs people root for until the real workload arrives. Gemma 4 is Google's attempt to narrow that gap. The official launch says the larger models rank high on open model leaderboards, and Google is very intentionally selling intelligence per parameter as the headline. That phrasing is smart, because it's not just bragging about raw scale, it's bragging about capability relative to size and hardware burden. That matters a lot in the real world. A model can be brilliant and still operationally annoying. A model can be smart and still expensive enough to push you back to a cloud API. A model can be open and still be impractical for normal developers with normal hardware. So if Gemma 4 really does push more useful capability into smaller, deployable packages, that changes the economics of OpenAI more than another giant benchmark flex ever could. And the smaller variants are where this gets especially spicy. Google is not positioning E2B and E4B as cute little compromised mini models. They're positioning them as edge-capable models with multimodal support, audio, long context, and agentic skills. That is a serious claim, because technically runnable on device and actually useful on device are not the same thing. A lot of edge AI dies in that gap. You can run it, great. Does it help? Is it fast enough? Reliable enough? Useful enough that someone would choose it instead of a cloud call or a larger model? That is the whole game. And then there's the ecosystem signal. Google says Gemma has already passed 400 million downloads and more than 100,000 variants. That does not prove Gemma 4 wins, but it does prove Gemma is not some lonely corporate side project nobody uses. There is already a community waiting to stress test this thing in public, which is exactly what makes this release interesting. Not the benchmark chest thumping. The fact that open model people now have something serious enough to argue about. Chapter 3. The local AI question. Here's the catch though. Google is still telling the story using Google's framing. And that means we should be a little rude and a little skeptical. Byte for byte is catchy, but it also hides a lot of messy, practical reality. Deployment cost, inference latency, quantization quality, fine-tuning pain, tool reliability, how often the agentic workflow works beautifully once and then faceplants the second the environment gets weird. All of that matters, and Google's own pitch raises the bar. Once you say the model is for reasoning and agents, not just chat, the standard changes. You are no longer being judged on whether it can write a clever answer. You are being judged on whether it can operate inside real, multi-step workflows without becoming a very articulate liability. That is a much harder test, and I think that's the most honest way to frame Gemma 4 right now. Very promising release. Very serious open model push. Not yet a final verdict on the future of local AI. Because the market question is not, can Google launch a strong open family? Looks like yes. The market question is, when real developers have real work to do they actually choose this over closed APIs or larger open alternatives? That answer will not come from Google's launch page. It will come from usage patterns. Do privacy-sensitive teams choose Gemma 4 for local or sovereign workflows? Do developers build good local coding tools around it? Do edge apps use the smaller models for tasks that feel genuinely useful instead of technically impressive? Do community fine-tunes explode? Do people keep reaching for Gemma after launch week? That is the adult test. Because AI launches always come with two products, the model and the narrative. Sometimes the narrative is smarter than the model. Sometimes the model quietly outruns the narrative. We don't know which one this is yet, but we do know what the important fight looks like. Not open versus closed as a religion, more like, can open models become serious enough that developers choose control on purpose?
Chapter 4: Breakthrough or Beautiful Framing.
So where do I land? Best case, Gemma 4 is a genuine shift. Not because it beats every closed frontier model at everything. That was never the real question. The real win would be this. Powerful open AI becomes much more normal for developers, small teams, and privacy-sensitive organizations. You can run capable reasoning and multimodal workflows on hardware you actually control. You can build agents without immediately surrendering your entire stack to cloud dependence. That would matter a lot. Most likely, Gemma 4 becomes a very strong open family for specific use cases: local coding assistance, private enterprise workflows, sovereign deployments, edge experiments that stop feeling like science projects, multimodal apps that need control more than maximum frontier power. In that version, closed models still dominate the hardest tasks, but the open side gets much more operationally serious. Worst case. Gemma 4 is genuinely good, but the launch narrative outruns the practical reality. Developers admire it. Benchmark people post screenshots. A bunch of great demos appear. And then, when the work gets hard, most serious apps still fall back to closed systems or much larger open ones. That would not make Gemma 4 a failure. It would just make it another step instead of a turning point. 3 takeaways. First, Gemma 4 is Google's strongest open model push yet. Second, the real story is not chatbot quality. It's reasoning, multimodality, local control, and agentic workflows under open weights. Third, the important question is not, is Gemma 4 smart? It's, does Gemma 4 make ownership practical? Because that is the fight that actually matters. Who gets to run capable AI locally? Who gets privacy? Who gets sovereignty? Who gets infrastructure instead of rent? If Gemma 4 helps move that line, it matters far beyond one launch cycle. If not, it's still a very impressive release that tells you something important. The open model race is not over. It just got a lot more serious. Signal over hype. Subscribe to join the expedition.